It's now 2 minutes after 7. This is Morning Express. In case you're joining us now, welcome aboard. It's time for the newsroom. And today we'd like to concentrate on the budget, which is going to be read tomorrow afternoon. And of course, right here on KTN News, we're certainly going to be bringing you that live as it proceeds. But before it is read, it is a time that many Kenyans wait for. But sometimes through our research, you find that many Kenyans may not quite understand what is the budget all about. They know that it affects them in one way or the other, but some of the figures that are thrown out there, 3 trillion budget, what exactly, how much is 3 trillion? What can that do? We know that it is a huge amount, but is that information that is palatable and understandable to the general public? Now, to have this conversation with me in the newsroom this morning, I'll reintroduce the guests that we already have for the newspaper review, and I'll start with Koki Ochieng, who is a lecturer at USIU on media and communication. We also have Honorable Yusuf Hassan, who's a member of parliament for Kamkunji, and we're also joined by Paul Wafula, who is a reporter with The Standard, and also is one who has done these reports for a while. Paul, welcome. Thank you. And I'll start with you. These figures that you reporters, and I say you reporters as though I'm not one of them, but you reporters that throw in our faces. We look at corruption and we look at it in billions. You look at the budget, we are seeing a 3 trillion budget, which is very high from what we have read in the papers. But do you go down to the level of making this completely understandable to the general public? What is 3 trillion? Why are we at 3 trillion? What does that mean to Kenya?
I think we sometimes fail to really contextualize the entire budget because sometimes it's huge, it's too huge, too many numbers, and by the time you get reporting to an accessible level to a common man on the street, it is sometimes too late in the day. So you find reporters, or the reporting is basically throwing around the numbers, what has been said, but contextualizing it in terms of really how much we're spending. That bit we fail to do to the satisfaction of many of our readers, and rightfully so. But if you look at 3 trillion, this is an amount that can actually, if you are to compare it to what we are doing right now, let's say even the thicker superhighway that many Kenyans are familiar with, that will be doing about 30 thicker superhighways if you are just building such roads. That's the kind of budget you're looking at. If it was a standard gauge railway, you are building 10 new standard gauge railways from Nairobi to Mombasa. What has been built with the tracks, everything. So that's the kind of money you are looking at. It's huge. It's not. It is really a huge budget.
It's a huge amount of money. All right, let me come to you, Mheshimiwa. And the budget is something that goes through Parliament, and by the time it gets to the time of the budget, members of Parliament have possibly debated on some of the aspects of that budget. What is it that you would want possibly to see on the dailies for the Mwananchi to understand? Because when you're debating on it in Parliament, you probably have a lot of information in the background. What is it that you'd see on the papers that you'd make the Mwananchi understand more what that budget is all about and how it affects him?
I think, first of all, as Wafula has said, that it's the budget reporting and even the interrogating the budget as parliamentarians is a very complex issue. You're dealing with huge amounts of money. You're dealing with complex issues in terms of how resources are allocated. And that actually does present a challenge both to the parliamentarian as well as to the reporter. But one thing that I have noted is that there is really not enough space allocated in the media to do justice to analyzing the budget. There's simply no such space, and I think editors do not care much, apart from the sensational elements of what is going to go up, what amount has been, which amount has been taken away by Parliament from a particular department or particular institution. So I think it is important maybe to say that there is a need for editors and publications to give more space for people to understand it better, and for reporters to be given that chance to be able to do an in-depth reporting of it. For example, I was in the Budget Committee in the last Parliament. I didn't see much interrogation or involvement of the reporters in the Budget Committee. They only wait for
the figures to come out.
Yeah, when the Budget Committee chair is doing a press statement to present his side of the story. So there's no interrogation or analysis of what goes into the budget-making process, which is quite important because there's a lot of haggling, there's a lot of horse trading. There's a lot of arguments of who deserves to be given what and where. And I think it would have been interesting for the reporters to have that behind-the-scenes perspective, so that the public gets a better understanding of what happens.
Okay, I'll come back to you on the actual process of coming up with a budget, because maybe that's an area that is not well understood. For instance, right now, one of the things that we're highlighting is the fact that the judiciary is going to have less money. Some money is going to be removed from NYS, and to the general public, we may not understand why and how that is concluded. So I'll come back to you on that. But Koki, let me bring you in, and how more creative can we be in telling this story? Because really, there's a delicate balance here. By the time the budget is read, there's other news making headlines, and let's face it, not everybody is interested in, numbers. People want to basically, a story is more interesting when you give it a human face. How do we become more creative in telling this story without becoming so boring and just concentrating on pure figures?
Okay. I think that's where now the element of data journalism comes in. And of course, that requires research, like he says. And like I've always said, you must always map, even if it's numbers, you must map it on processes, or like you're saying, the budget process. Or you must map it on activities that are required to be done within a given entity. So let's take central government, for example. Since devolution, the role of central government has been narrowed down to policy making, and probably a few things that have been thrown to the county. You should be able to give us a map of what is expected of central government in terms of policy making. That then could justify the expenditure at that level. And then you go back to looking at the devolved governance. What are the responsibilities they are being given? And then map it accordingly. So when I got the call yesterday, I went and looked at the budget of Nairobi City Council. And I went through, and I saw it's activity-based. You can see very well every docket has been given a certain amount. Now, the journalist needs to have time to ask for justification. Like he says, the budgeting process doesn't come from Parliament. It actually comes from the institutions or the ministries or, the counties, and then it is centralized, and then people have to haggle about it. The question would be, what is that process? What are the activities? And again, in retrospect, what has the money been used for before? What is it currently being used for? And what is the future, being seen there? When he says that it is 10, when you said 10? 10 SGR. Now I got a picture. So then I want to ask, yes, so now this one SGR, what has been the return of, so it makes it really basic, and I can be able to see that SGR was built, and in this 1 year, they have come up with this amount, and this is how it goes back into the national kitty. If it is a Thika Road, I want to know, okay, Thika Road, 30 of them. So what is the return of investment? So in so much as it is complex, there are numbers, there's no time. Really, if you map these things before, you look at it in retrospect, you look at it currently and in the future, then you'll be able to give us a clear understanding of what is going on.
All right, Paul, is it true that there is no space for you to tell that story, or is it just a lack of creativity? Because at the end of the day, there are times we have a lull in terms of, sensational stories. Would that be the time that now we can take advantage? And do we have to tell this story just before the budget, or is this one that can be spread out over time?
You see, in reporting, sometimes what people, and what Mheshimiwa says sensationalizing stories, it's a very tricky balance, because you want to find out why should people care about this budget. As you get in, you want to ask yourself, what is the important thing here? Who is losing what? Who is gaining what? Most readers or most consumers want to know how this budget is affecting them. Mama Mboga wants to know, how is this budget affecting them? So if you get out there and you're looking at the numbers, you want really to bring the reporting very close to the person that it will affect. So in that process, you end up sometimes being a bit more dramatic or a bit sensational just to bring the point home. But if you look at the hard numbers, sometimes they're very hard. Sometimes it's very, they're very inaccessible. Even when you speak to politicians themselves who actually are approving these numbers, if you talk to them, some of them even don't have an idea of what is happening because they only concentrate on the area that they're interested in. Once they have what it is, they move. So someone who has actually the entire view of the budget will be the National Treasury or probably the budget committee in Parliament. Other than those, you find that most people really just are interested in what really affects them. But that is why now you find the kind of reporting that as it ends up, you find that we are looking at, like when the CS Treasury tomorrow comes, you want to know how is he going to finance his budget? And now, when we are talking about how we are going to finance it, is how is he going to tax us? So he has to be able to tell us where he's going to get the money. In that process, he ends up maybe increasing taxes. We're expecting, for instance, for him to say, to introduce what they're calling Robin Hood taxes, where you find they're picking from the rich and giving it to the poor. So you find people like, mobile phone companies should expect increase in taxation. You find the people who are earning more salaries and the others will generally the wealthy will be taxed higher. So that this is distributed to the rest of the population. This can be justified depending on how you look at it. But we don't have too many people out there. We don't have so many companies that you can tax 35%, for instance. There are just so few. So if you look at the increase in the budget, and then you look at how much we are raising, you realize that there's only so much the National Treasury can do. So at the end of the day, it again comes back to Mwananchi. So there will be, we're going to tax the rich more, but those taxes will actually come down because they'll be passed down to you and me.
All right, and that's probably where the Mwananchi really wants to know. How is it going to affect me directly? What does that mean to the price of unga? What does that mean to the milk that I buy? What does that mean to my salary at the end of the day? I'll come back to you on that and maybe how we can tell that more creatively. Mheshimiwa, what is the budget-making process? We've talked about not having highlighted it, but this would be a good opportunity for Kenyans to know what is, in a nutshell, because I'm sure it's pretty long and we may not have time to cover that right now, but maybe in a nutshell, what is that procedure? Because we have Treasury coming out, the Minister for Treasury, Rotich, coming out with a briefcase. We'll come to what is in that briefcase, but what is the process?
Well, it starts with the Treasury. The Treasury usually sets up a threshold. It says, this is what we can collect in terms of tax, and this is what we can afford as a country. And therefore, a budget, the national budget, should not be above that particular setting. And then every ministry is given, comes up with its own plans to say, this is what we intend to do in terms of recruitment, in terms of development, in terms of buying equipment, in terms of building infrastructure. This is how much it will cost us. They come to Parliament. And usually when they come to Parliament, they come through the committees. For example, I'm in the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee. So the Defense Ministry comes to us. It says the threshold that we have been given is too low because we are planning to modernize. We need to recruit more soldiers.
And maybe while you're on that, since you've brought it up on page 34 of the Standard, I can actually see Kenya's military budget shoots past 100 billion. And that, to any Mwananchi looks like, wow, that's too much. But maybe there is a good reason.
But given the fact that we are in we're in the midst of countries that are in conflict, like South Sudan. We have military operations in Somalia, which is a country, again, which is at war. We have many challenges internally and externally, and therefore we need to build a world-class modern military force. That is their argument. And to do that costs money, to buy equipment, to expand the military, to have more, recruit more professional people into the service. And that is how they have come to argue bit by bit, putting in front of us what their needs are. And then the Treasury discussing it with them to make sure that, in fact, they meet their demands and their national priorities. That is how they reach that figure. And to a certain extent, no ministry ever gets what it wants. Every ministry complains. For example, Defense, again, the other ministry I oversight is Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs, again, now we're a dynamic country now, trying to assert our position, project our position in Africa and the world. And yet when you look, we do not have sufficient representation in Africa and in the world. We need to expand our embassies. So they've come with a budget to say, the 17 billion you're giving us is not enough. We're going to open new embassies. We're going to build more embassies. We're going to recruit more people to serve in the foreign service. And this is brought to the committees and to the House, and every department then argues for its case. We argue against all four, and you reach a compromise, but you can never go beyond the threshold of how much you can afford as a country.
Paul, you wanted to add something?
There's something that Mheshimiwa said here, and this is really something that we always come back to Parliament and ask them. For instance, just the military budget. This is 100 billion plus. Every year, another 20 billion is added. The argument is modernization. On the budgeting front, every Kenyan is convinced the military needs more money. But on the accountability part, anytime we ask questions about, has this equipment,
has it gone towards what it's supposed to?
It becomes, this is a national security, journalists are harassed, but if you ask the guys on the ground, they'll tell you this money is not being used for that. Maybe just 40% is going towards the equipment that they're saying. And you'll know this when, when there's maybe an attack and you realize that an aircraft has actually is not even working, that they're saying it is, or when you find some of the equipment, like the time they was talking about grenades that were not working. Funny things that happen in there, or soldiers in Somalia without bullets, all those things come out eventually when there's now an attack and nobody can answer those questions. So at what point do we talk about, because Kenyans really are, okay, fine, let us pay the taxes, let the government have the money. But the other bit that really gets us,
the
accountability part, and Parliament sometimes is not good enough to just ask these hard questions.
Okay.
Even some of these budgets as they come through Parliament, you realize that sometimes just a rubber stamp. A bit of changes here and there, but what National Treasury really essentially says, you find maybe 200 million has been shifted or 300 million, nothing really significant.
Okay, and I know, Mheshimiwa, you want to come in on that, but let me bring in Koki on whether it's a failure on our part by virtue of the fact that there is this 100 billion, and I'm just using this as an example. There is two things. One, the accountability part of it, but secondly, the justification, because the fact that that money has been given, are there returns that we can see? For the military, we would expect more safety, would expect more, a military that is more prepared for war. But are we able to, as the media, follow that through to a point where now we can say, yes, 100 billion plus was given and it was justified?
I think that's now where the challenge comes in, where the transparency element is not, and accountability element is not clear. Because in so much as each ministry justifies, and I remember, I always go back to my little public service experience, I knew every year there was a performance contract and there was a budget that, if we achieved this, then this is what should have come to us. And internally, let's be honest, in government, there is that system where you are given a budget, then you account for it. It's systemic. There's no way out of it. And that's how they come to the parliamentary committees and justify what they have. But then the question is, what is the impact of that on the ground? For example, we have the Agenda 4. Okay. Now, based on the budget that we've been given, where is it and how much priority has it been given in terms of money? If we are talking about health, how much priority has it been given? If we are talking about national food security, how much priority has that been given? When I look through the papers, I can see taxation coming in various in farming equipment. I can see taxation of, tea equipment. I can see fertilizers that are not. So then at the end of the day, the feeling is that, yes, we are willing to put our resources as Kenyans in this government. Then we are not aggrieved by the budgeting process. But what we are grieved at is the accountability part of it. Because at the end of the day, it's my shilling. When you look at your pay, I don't know whether you look at your pay slip, you see a third of it is gone.
No, it's very painful.
And you don't know, you really don't know where exactly it has been placed. You can't place. We said, okay, the county system will come in. I'll probably see some development in my village. And those basic things like I don't need to take care of my parent because there's a hospital at home, there's schools for my siblings, those kind of things are the things that Kenyans want to see. Yeah.
Mheshimiwa, you wanted to weigh in on that and also the accountability part of it. When now we try and probe, obviously there is that question mark of whether it's transparent enough for us to actually come and see the figures. This 100 billion was approved, it was given, but has it been spent on what it was supposed to?
I think there are two there are two separate things here. Now, one, we were talking about the budget-making process, which is allocating the resources to the ministry. But when you bring accountability, that is a separate matter. That requires the institutions of oversight, audit, and others to show that, in fact, that money has been used well. And to a certain extent, if I answer Wafula's question, is that there is no a military or a defense system in the world that would put its secrets out there in the open, anywhere in the world, including the so-called advanced democracies like the United States, because it affects national security. So it is true to a certain extent that it is difficult to interrogate item by item what is inside there. But that doesn't mean that the Defense Ministry is not oversighted. It is not audited. Of course, it is audited, and it's oversighted by Parliament. It is audited by the Auditor General. And to a certain extent, I would say that as I was in this committee in the 10th Parliament and in the 11th Parliament, we have done our work. We have made the Defence and Foreign Affairs Committee made major exposure of defence in the 10th Parliament and in the 11th Parliament that perhaps has not been well covered in the media. But it is true that huge amounts of money are going into it, but also a lot of development has taken place. We usually see the minor problems, but our Defence Force has gone through a major modernization. And I think you would notice every year when they come out, and their performance in Somalia is a clear indication that to a certain extent we're doing very well, although we are fighting, we're not fighting a conventional war, we're fighting against a guerrilla movement which can hit and cause damage at any time.
Okay, I will agree largely with that. And maybe just to add, I mean, we wouldn't want to have the military come and say, oh, all right, we've bought so many planes and these are the types and everything. But if the Auditor General, the only person allowed to actually look at what has been spent, if it's really spent, we will expect that the military can actually allow access for someone like the Auditor General to be able to actually audit.
And the thing is here, I think
if the Auditor General says, I cannot access, I cannot be able to say if the military...
And it's not just the military. There are other sectors that possibly, even transport, for example, where it becomes very difficult to follow up on that. Koki, how do we get this out, this information out? Because at the end of the day, we do know that we have leaders or gatekeepers who possibly would want to line their pockets, and by virtue of that fact, they will ensure that information is not out there.
Okay, now if you want to go by the Auditor's General report, how willing is the media to thematically look at those issues and pursue? For example, you say this year it is Agenda 4, we are looking at food security, and just make media advocacy effort to just look at that food security issue in terms of research, in terms of budget, in terms of what's happening in the ground. So it has to be the media to reflect back on do we have that space to thematically research on a particular issue to the end, so that by the end of the 4 or 5 years of this regime, we shall be able to say that food security was achieved, just the way we do SDGs and MDGs. Kenyans have been able to follow through and map, you know, the MDGs pursued, those that have failed. So how can media make an effort, and not just by itself? You can work with other donors, you can work with other people who basically would bring in the money required for the research, and I think that would be the way to go. Because at the end of the day, media is money-making, but then again, you're saying that if you're here for public interest, then you need to kind of shape your reporting in such a way that you really connect the national agenda to the day-to-day life of the common Wananchi.
Mheshimiwa, you wanted to add on to that?
I think the thing I notice most is that they simply, the media does not put enough resources and enough expertise to be able to cover such complex issues. It is mainly done when something happens, like there's a scandal, is when
knee-jerk reaction.
There's the feeding frenzy, where all the media headlines focus on that particular issue. But if you look at at what is happening in terms of oversight is that many of this, we have highlighted many of these red lights in our committee meetings. We say that doesn't look very good. We need more answers. The Auditor General has come out. In fact, he's itemized what is wrong in the Ministry of Defense with this aircraft you're talking about and the armored cars and so on. It is there if you look at the report. So I think it is important for the media to invest more in investigative abilities, to give more resources to journalists to be able to allocate time and resources to be able to do the job very well. Because it is a time-consuming thing to follow on a particular ministry or a particular department's activities. It just doesn't happen at one go, and then you realize that something has been stolen or
has gone missing.
And we know of media research organizations like I've met Africa Check here, I've met Pesa Check, I've met so many, organizations who would like to affiliate with the media to really work together. Just put people together, stakeholders of like-mindedness, academia. You have, people who can help in data visualization. Like the other day, I saw a very nice clip on corruption since Goldenberg and Anglo-listing, and the coins kept dropping. Small things that make people aware about what is going on. Activism, to some extent, you might not drive it, but you might tell the stories. So I think partnerships with people who are like-minded, people who are taking time to look into these budgets, to look into these stories, to look into these facts, can enrich the media house. And you can simply, like just the way you have special desks, this time you have special desks to check on governance, to check on how money is being used, and throw it in, not reactively, like we're saying, but throw it in once in a while so that people now are alert and they can do something about it. Yeah.
Paul, your thoughts on whether there is enough resource, and I'm sure you probably would say no, but what is required so that that desk, if it is a specific desk that follows maybe on ministries or follows on corruption, the same way we have health desks and we have investigative desks, can we have one that literally just audits the budget, or money in, money out?
It's a shame that we actually do not take the budget making process and this kind of reporting as seriously as we should. Because sincerely, it's high time we actually have a specialized desk that just monitors the government spending. Because, if you want to know really the intention of a government, if you want to know really if a government is really keen on doing something, you look at how they budget. Because how they budget is how they plan to be able to achieve some specific goal. So before you even start complaining that we have a broken healthcare system, you can actually tell from the beginning that there is no money no resource that has been given to do that. You look at the National Treasury, for instance. The National Treasury wants 100 billion plus, and it's just a policy organ. So you ask yourself, what's really the National Treasury doing with 100 billion every year? I mean, you don't expect them as a ministry right at the top just to be spending so much money. So you need someone to actually monitor and be able to see why is so much money being given to this department. So that by the time even NYS is there, scandal, you realize that they were given too much money and they were not even prepared for it. So that kind of a thing. But just to bring you back to the budget, there are some things that maybe we need just to pay closer attention to. And this is how much the budget has changed in the last 5 years or so. You realize that right now, what the Kenya Revenue Authority is able to raise, and that has, as in from ordinary revenue, what is they're taxing you and I, is not enough to actually run the national government alone. Yeah? So if you look at them, maybe the plan is to raise about 1.7 trillion. That's what the KRA should be able to raise. And the national government, if you look at what their budget is, about 1.6 trillion. So that's about 100 billion difference. And always the taxman never gets to the target. So give and take, if they're able to raise just that, who will fund the judiciary? Judiciary has their own budget. Parliament has their own budget. You find counties have about 300 billion. So if you put all this into context, and then you realize that we are paying about 900 billion in debt, you just realize that right now we are at a situation whereby if something goes wrong in the economy, we are going to borrow to be able to pay actually salaries. So these are the issues that actually concern should be concerning even parliamentarians as they pass this budget, because you find you have such a small I mean the headroom for you to move around is so small with the National Treasury that if something just happens in the economy, we will not be able to actually pay salaries, and we are just continuing to borrow. Look at it this way. This 1 year alone, the debt repayment has shot up by 221 billion. Just 1 year. If you look at that, we were at 600, we are going to 870 billion. If we continue with that, very soon we shall be in a position whereby all the money that KRA raises just goes towards paying debt. You'll be told that we'll be refinancing, we shall be borrowing, that government borrows to pay debt and stuff like that. But we should not be in a position whereby we are borrowing under stress. And every year as you look at it, our borrowing has now become more and more expensive because we are borrowing under stress, because we have no other way.
Okay.
But if, yeah.
All right. Mheshimiwa, coming to you as we now get we're winding up. What is it that you would like to see on our dailies, in the news, all over, in terms of educating the electorate about the budget? Because it's an important part of our living. I mean, we wake up every morning to go to work, and when you get taxed a third of your salary, then of course it is a matter of concern. What is it that you'd like to see and say, indeed, the media now is covering what is important and educating the electorate? Because it weighs in even in terms of leadership. When we go to the polls, we're basically voting for this.
Yes, I think it is important for our media to put resources in the right place, to have the right expertise. And I think by having good reporters full-time doing this kind of work, as Wafula has suggested, and which would be the best thing if they have the resources, is to provide a serious and thorough analysis of the budget and how it is the decision is made, how that decision is reached, and how that money is allocated, and also how it is spent. For example, we have a very efficient budget committee, budget office in Parliament that guides the committee in how to go about putting the budget process and interrogation into place. Journalists have access to their reports. They do a monthly report. Even on the debt issue, the Treasury Office has a debt management office which monitors how we are doing in terms of debt. And I think the Kenyan public would be able to make the right decisions about how their country is run when they're well informed. They can an informed population is a good population that can make the right decisions during elections. But also the other element of the budget that is not doesn't come out is not what goes to defense and what goes to health, but 60% or more of our budget goes to wages. You know, that has not been looked at. You know, we cannot afford as a country to have that kind of system in place where thousands of people earn salaries, and we have less and less money for development. Yes. So I think that's another element.
Okay. All right, Koki, as you do that, your closing comments as well.
Yeah, not just, I noticed, yes, salaries, but also a lot of travel money, a lot of money for
recurrent
benchmarking.
Expenses.
Yes, and then the question is, at the end of the day, what is the return? Yes. You know, we don't mind that you benchmark. Like I saw Zambia benchmarking.
How to deal with corruption in Kenya.
That,
Maybe it's how to be more corrupt, but anyway.
But actually, the ethics body is quite efficient in what it does. Probably it's just the execution. But what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, if you benchmark, you remember Baringo, where they threw out the governor, they threw out the MCAs. It's because they went on Facebook about benchmarking. But now, when you benchmark, you come back, put the project in place, let's see the return. I think that's the idea. We don't mind all these activities around government, you know, travel and whatever, but then they need to feed back to what is required on the ground. Again, to the question of salaries. Do we need all these people? Is it efficient? We ask ourselves that. Many organizations are ISO certified in government, or they're efficient, but the question is, that efficiency and effectiveness, is it seen in our day-to-day lives?
All right, Paul Wafula, your closing comments.
For me, I would like to see a situation whereby even as we get into the new budget, we look at what really happened in the budget that is ending. For instance, every year we have been throwing money towards laptops. Even this year, there's some allocation. Of course, the name is now being changed, digital literacy, digital whatever, but it's still the same program. Kenyans know there are no laptops on the ground. We've been throwing money to the stadiums. Yeah? They're still not out there. So as we close the year, we want to ask the National Treasury, what did you do with last year's budget? What are the things that you promised to do? Have you done them, even before we allow you to be able to spend this? I think if Parliament will be in a position to be able to say, unless you'll be able to do what you said you'll do last year, you cannot come and ask for more resources. Then that way, you'll find people actually more accountable. But I think we are in a good place. Reporting has really improved. Today, you find the budget stories on page 1 of all the dailies, or, I mean, the whole week, and the coverage has really improved. But I think there's more that needs to be done to be able just to, yeah.
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning on the newsroom. That's Paul Wafula, who's a reporter with the Standard Group. We also have Honorable Yusuf Hassan, Member of Parliament for Kamkunji. And last but not least, we have Kokyo Ching, who is a lecturer at USIU Media and Communication. Thank you for joining us this morning on the newsroom. And that's where we wind up the newsroom. But do stay with us. Morning Express continues. And today's Wednesday. We look at your health. And since we are on Matters Budget, we are looking at how, or rather we'll be looking at what universal healthcare looks like, but more importantly, how do you fund your healthcare? How are you taking care of your health and what needs to be done? That's all coming up right here with my colleague Zinzi Kibiku. But for now, we're going to take a short break, but do stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is KTN News.